On this edition of the Table of Content, Michael and I review The Heron, an Aesop fable, where we follow a bird, but we find out sometimes waiting for bigger isn't always better. Stay tuned, that's coming up next, right here on the Table of Content. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Table of Content. I am Albert Saenz, joined with Michael Steele. Michael, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Albert. As this overpass to our town says, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
You know, it's easy when you live in the hometown of Fred Rogers for you to say things like that.
It really is, right? It's always a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Down here in my small rural community in Texas, we don't have overpasses. We just pass by cows. So, and the cows don't say much. They just sort of do their thing.
Would that be a bypass then? A cow bypass?
Yes.
A bovine bypass.
Bovine bypass. So today, as you heard in the introduction, we are going to be covering the Aesop fable, The Heron. And it's sort of a fishing story. And it's kind of funny because I've never been like a huge fisherman, but I've fished, especially growing up on the Gulf Coast, fishing with dad, fishing with other people. And when I was an active scout, we did fishing trips. And I was never a great fisherman. What about you? I mean, you're from Southern California. Did you have access to, ample amounts of fishing, or was that not your thing?
There were a few. So I grew up in the desert, and
Not too many fish in the desert, I assume.
no, we had to drive to local man-made, reservoir lakes. And like you were saying, every once in a while we'd have beginner's luck, but then the day would kind of drag on. I remember as a boy, I was taken to the ocean a couple of times, and that's a whole different story of fishing. That was pretty exciting. I remember when I was like 8 or so, or maybe a little bit older, a friend's dad caught a blue shark, and that was pretty exciting. But I kind of lost my taste for it, but then was reintroduced to it later on, and was introduced to fly fishing, and that's a whole different world in and of itself, and I really liked it. Uh, but yeah, so I guess I fell away from it, and then with renewed success came renewed enthusiasm. So yeah, I every once in a while take our 6-year-old boy out for fishing at the local pond here, and he's into it. So we're hoping to do more of that now that the weather's loosening up.
I have a friend who's just sort of nagging me since I moved back to Texas. He wants to take me on a fishing trip, so I'm trying to find my way to get back into fishing. But as with all things, that's a time commitment. But
Hmm.
we'll get there.
Hmm. Hmm.
But this is not our fishing stories. This is about a fishing story from Aesop. And if you're not familiar with the story of the Heron, go to our website, waobaudiotheater.org, check under Door-to-Door Storytellers, or visit us at our YouTube site for We Are One Body Audio Theater, and look up the Heron real short. Again, like Aesop has this knack for packing a whole lot into a very short story. But basically, we have the heron, who's a bird, and the heron wants to eat some food. So he goes out, and turns out, as it says directly from the story, from the fable, the clear water swarmed with fish, but Master Heron was hard to please that morning. I'd have to say, most mornings I'm kind of hard to please. I wake up and I'm just, it's hard to get me going in the morning. So I kind of feel a little bit like the heron sometimes in the mornings.
Right. Especially when it comes to breakfast choices, what do I want? Sheesh.
If
Well,
I lived next door to a Cracker Barrel, I would be rolling in there for a big breakfast every morning, and mornings wouldn't be so rough.
oh man, yes, I hear you.
But the heron says, no small fry for me, he said. Such scanty fare is not fit for a heron. And it's I think that your example is actually really good. You said especially trying to decide what we want for breakfast, and it's a good segue.
Mm,
I don't know how it is specifically for you, but I know I wake up in the morning, and sometimes I sort of by choice, by uh, the amount of time I have before work, you know, like I can only have a bowl of cereal, and
yep.
I can be sort of satisfied, but I want egg, sausage, toast, hash browns, big glass of orange juice, right? And
Yes.
I think in our lives we kind of hit those sort of breakfast decisions a lot. We're like, well, I would prefer to not have a glass of water. I would like your fresh squeezed lemonade on ice,
Hmm.
with the right amount of sugar. You want that bigger thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's true. I've recently found myself on a poached egg marathon. I'm the type of guy who like I'll eat things for months and months and months on end, and then I just get tired of it, and then it just kind of goes away for a year or two, and then it reemerges once renewed enthusiasm. But it's true. And you're thinking about the well. First of all, I had a point about what you said about Aesop. I was admiring as well how, on the one hand, Aesop must have been a keen observer of both nature and also the human spirit, because obviously, like, maybe it was his own personal experience, or maybe he was observing someone else when he got the idea, like you were saying, to kind of merge these two. But I was also thinking, like, why would you choose a heron? And if you've seen a heron, they do have kind of a natural, kind of stately air about them. There's a dignity and poise that they have. At the local park here, there's a river that runs, or a creek. I mean, I grew up in the desert, so I call it a river, but out here where water is aplenty, they call it a creek. But we actually, a couple years ago, my family and I saw a great blue heron fishing, and actually saw it catch a fish. And there was something really majestic about it. In fact, the kids named the heron Cora. I don't, I don't know, Cora the heron. But but I was thinking about that, right? That Aesop's storytelling ability, and then as well, why would he choose a heron for this particular story of you know difficult breakfast decisions? Yeah. So I think it got me thinking as well. The story kind of points to something deeper, I think, in the heron. I was wondering, and maybe this is a stretch, but it's not just about the heron being picky. There's also, I think, kind of like an inflation of his own self-worth or vanity, because he's like,
Sure.
you know, no small fry for me, he said. Such scanty fare is not fit for a heron. Like, he is well aware of his supposed dignity and what ought to be his fare. So,
Well, not to get too far off in another story, but it's like the Dr. Seuss story, Yertle the Turtle. You have
mm,
this turtle which he decides he wants to be king of all the turtles, and he
mm,
keeps wanting to get higher and higher and higher, and he keeps having other turtles stack up underneath him so that he can rule more and more of the land. And eventually, he falls, and he's reduced basically to being a regular turtle after he falls from his height, and you know to I think we see in these authors who take animals and give them sort of positions of authority or
mm,
positions of power. It sort of helps us to see it sort of from a different angle, because I think we sort of sometimes, oh yeah, it's just another person, it's just another you know human who's in charge, another king, another boss, another
right.
ruler, another tyrant. But I think it actually gives us a moment to sort of look at it from our human perspective and consider that the positions of power, or self-inflated ego, that
Yeah.
we can give to ourselves, it makes it a little bit more sort of graspable, even though it's an animal, if that makes sense. So
Yes.
I think using animals was something that Aesop did to help us sort of contemplate it in a different way instead of just sort of, brushing it off like, yeah, it's just another story about another guy.
Yeah. Yeah. He isolates kind of that subtle underlying attitude, brings it into relief and light by embodying it in an animal that kind of matches the attitude that he's trying to teach the lesson on. Yeah.
Right, because the heron is somewhat of an elegant looking creature. It's maybe not the most majestic bird, but there is
Mm,
certainly an elegance to it. Its long beak, its thin legs, its particular frame. So does that sort of, and it isn't exactly a bloated or overweight type of animal, right?
right.
So perhaps again speculating, you know the heron maintains some sort of a trim physique,
Hmm.
because it treats itself with such reverence, and oh well, I deserve the best. And maybe to sort
Mm,
of, well, if we put that into human forms and we consider someone who's thin and who's very sort of elegant about the way they carry themselves, like, oh well, I only eat the best and I am not a
mm,
glutton and I am not, oh, okay, fine, but
right.
you still may end up sort of suffering on the back end, because of how you treat yourself. And again, this is all
Yeah.
speculation on why Aesop chose a heron instead of a crow or
Right.
an eagle or a snake, but
Hmm.
perhaps he's trying to sort of match it to a person who might have a similar sort of not only physical appearance, but also sort of a personality.
Yeah. Right. Kind of like that vanity,
Right,
just
right.
being so kind of obsessed about one's perceived self-worth, whether that's actually grounded or not. Yeah, I was just also thinking, it's not just a matter of being picky. I'm sure both of you and I have um experience having young children, it's kind of the picky eater phase,
Oh yeah,
you know, where
every
they
day, every
yeah.
day.
And it's not like, our I don't like serve something to my 6-year-old son. He's like, no, you know, such fares not befit my stately bearing as a 6-year-old. Like, it just doesn't like the taste.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was kind of something that is like, yeah, just kind of hinted at the heron's kind of vanity. Like, no, this is this is too, I'm too good for this opportunity.
And then he goes on in the story, right? And another fish comes by. It says, "Now a fine young perch swam near." And again, the heron retorts, "No, indeed," said the heron. "I wouldn't even trouble to open my beak for anything like that." And so again, he's presented with another opportunity, but again, he sort of, his inflated ego, his vanity gets in the way. And then we come pretty much already to the end of the fable. As the sun rose, the fish left the shallow water near the shore and swam below into the cool depths towards the middle. The heron saw no more fish, and very glad he was at last to breakfast on a tiny snail.
Right. Right.
So, he waited and wanted more. He waited and wanted more, and then ended up having to be grateful for a snail.
Hmm.
And I can tell you, I don't do escargot. I would have trouble finding the opportunities to be grateful to have a snail after passing up on fresh fish.
Yeah, right. I think I had escargot once. It was chewy, and it was drowned in butter. So really, it was chewy, buttery kind of
Mmm.
consistency. Yeah,
Sounds tempting, but
yeah.
maybe one day I'll have some chewy
You should
butter.
you should try it sometime, right? Just to say you did it. But
But we have the whole story now. We have the whole
mm,
fable, and of course, and the moral is here. It says, "Do not be too hard to suit, or you may have to be content with the worst, or with nothing at all." And I think that's a lot of us. we decide that, well, I'm going to wait a little bit more. There's
Mm,
something better. There's something greater. There's
mm,
something more for me to have. And you
yes.
pass and you pass and you miss and you miss, and then you end up, settling, or you have
Yeah.
nothing
Hmm.
because you told yourself, I got to hang on just a little bit more.
Hmm.
And so I
Hmm.
think we all have a lot of these experiences of the heron in our own lives.
Yeah. Isn't in economics, isn't that what they call like opportunity costs? Like you're just kind of like the in terms of measuring out the value of something, you you can evaluate the actual value of missed opportunities for one reason or another, you know. So yeah, so
That
that,
sounds
that
very economic. I'll take your word for it. I
mhm,
wasn't an economic student. I only
mhm,
remember supply and demand from my
mhm,
high school class.
same here. Other than, and that just came to light there as you're talking, but yeah, that idea of no, I'm gonna hold out for something better. Um, and like I said, like there's more nuance to the story because it's not like it's the heron. It's not like the heron was like hungry enough to go after this thing. The heron was kind of blinded by it, like you said earlier, his own inflated ego, his own inflated self worth. Like, no, does not befit my station or my dignity or whatever as a heron. And so he lets it go by. I figured like if he were hungry enough and desperate enough, yeah, the first fish that would go by, he'd snatch it up. As like you were saying, making that jump to human experience, right? When we're in a situation where we're like, we really need something and we're looking for it, and the opportunity presents itself, we jump at it. Versus like when you have a lot of options and you're not really in a position of desperation, you're kind of there are opportunities that pass that may never present themselves. And like you were saying, the opportunities may not be getting better. They might kind of diminish until we're satisfied to breakfast on escargot.
I couldn't help but think about the Exodus story and the Israelites, right?
Mm,
And they're out in the desert, and God gives them food, in the form of manna, and He
mm,
makes sure that they're taken care of, right? That
yeah.
they don't need anything. But what happens? They sort of begrudge the Lord and His gift of this food from heaven, you
Yeah.
know, and like we want more, like we had we had plenty in when we were slaves, basically. Like we got to eat better when we were slaves. Like
Mm,
now we're out here in the desert, you know. So we we get into that sort of place where, you know, we're given what we need, and it's right in front of us. And we're like,
mm,
no, no, no. It's not good enough. I'm tired of this. I want something different. It's like, wait,
yeah.
so, and sometimes that thing that we want is actually the worst thing that we could want, but it seems to our eyes, right, that that's really what I should have, and in the sense of the Israelites, they wanted basically slavery,
Yeah.
because they're like, well, at least we'll have something better to eat,
Right.
and it's like, well, wait a second, God's giving you the opportunity for something much, much better, and you're asking for more food, you're asking for something more, and it's leading you back in the wrong direction. And how many times
Right.
do we do that with God? We're like, God's like, I've got you. You're like, no, God, I need something more. And
Yeah.
then we end up going on the wrong path.
Right. Right. Sort of like the attitude of the heron, like I won't even trouble to open my beak for anything like that. The idea is like, even though that better may require effort or may require a period of discomfort and trust and travel and pilgrimage, as following your example of the chosen people in their exodus. Um, right, but then they fixate on what they had, forgetting that what cost slavery. Right, so they'd be willing to go back into slavery just so that they could have their flesh pots and have three square meals in a cot, which that's not really a life, especially if you're living under, servitude. But and as you were talking, Albert, another story came to mind along the same lines. The story I remember is called "The Fisherman and the Flounder," and the idea is fisherman catches a flounder. As in a fairy tale, a flounder can talk and basically says, "Hey, do me a solid and let me go." And the fisherman does that, goes back to his wife. The wife is like, you know, that was a magic flounder. You should probably go back and ask for a wish. So, what should I wish for? Well, wish that we're wealthy. So he goes back. Can you make us wealthy? And he keeps going for, and the wife continues to ask for bigger, bigger, and she's never content. Is the moral of the story, is like, until at last they're like emperor and empress of the land, and she's still like not content. And he goes back one last time to the flounder, and the flounder says, "Well, you'll receive what you deserve." And if full circle, they're back to being in a fisherman's hut by the edge of the ocean. And that's the idea of like, as human beings, you're right. There's something in us that's never satiated, is never satisfied. We're always kind of looking for something more.
That line that you'll get what you deserve.
Mm.
I think that is a direct correlation to eternity for us as Christians. I think about the story, the parable, right, of Lazarus and the rich man. And so in some instances in our lives, we do get more. We get a lot more. And in that parable, right, there's the rich man. He has everything. He wants for nothing. And Lazarus, he has nothing, and he's destitute, and basically the poorest of the poor.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Well, they each die, and Lazarus is on the good side. He's in heaven, and the rich man is not.
Right.
And so all that he had for that opulent life, all the riches, all the best foods, everything what he needed, right? He got more.
Yeah.
It didn't end up helping him in the end. It gave him basically eternal damnation.
Right.
And of course then he gets afraid and says, "Well, you need to go warn my relatives." And
Yeah.
they're like, "Nah, it's not gonna work."
Right.
If they won't do it on their own, if they won't believe the prophets, it's not going to do any good. So it's a real good point to be like, hey, it's not about getting more. It's about finding that right place with what you have in front of you, finding
Yes.
your right relationship with God, finding your right relationship with your faith,
Right.
your spiritual life, so that you can be ready for what you deserve,
Yes.
because really what we do deserve is we do deserve,
Yeah.
because really what we do deserve is heaven, and okay, none of us are worthy of it, but that's what we were created for. That's why Jesus died for us, to give us the
Right.
opportunity, right? So let's not screw it up by demanding more and more and more and more. And then we get more and more and more and more. And then we lose sight of really what's most important.
Yeah. Right. I like how you said that, losing sight of what's really important. And the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and thinking back to master storytellers. I mean, our Lord Jesus Christ using parables to transmit these realities of the human state of things. Exactly. Right. He kind of was bringing to light that idea of that desire for opulence or wealth, but also how it's limited in this world. Yeah, we can go through this world being comfortable, but that's never really going to make us deeply and truly happy. And that's maybe another conversation for another time, but like true happiness, true full, absolute happiness is never found in this life. It's only found in the next. Like you were saying, if we have the faith to see it now and not settle for kind of cheap substitutes.
I mean, and we look at the heron, right? If he had
Mm,
just taken the fish that was in front of him, he probably could have had he probably could have had 20 small fish and
right.
had a full stomach and been very content, right?
Yeah.
He could have had the perch and been content, but he ended up losing on all of the food he could have eaten and having just a snail. And he was, I'd like to bet that the heron was still hungry, right?
Hmm.
Because
Oh yeah.
he didn't fill himself with the goodness that was provided to him in the beginning. And what ends up happening in our faith lives is we end up with the sort of the scraps. We end up with the snail, and it does not satisfy us. We're either just sad or we're still hungry. And the point
Mm,
is, the only thing that will feed us fully is Christ. And
yeah.
we'll say, well, I'll have Christ later.
Right.
Christ isn't enough right now. I
Right.
need something else. Well, you're going to end up with the snail and you're not going to be happy. And then you're going to say to yourself, well, try again. And it's not
Mm,
going to be enough. And you'll end up with
hmm.
another snail, right? So you just end up
Yeah.
hungry in the end. You end up hangry, you know?
That's right.
You're hungry and
Angry.
you're angry and you can't figure it out. It's like, well, because you passed on Jesus, because you passed on our Lord.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the nice thing about our Lord is that he's actually seeking us. I was just thinking about that as you were talking. The fish in the story were just kind of doing their own thing. They weren't like catering to the heron. It's not like they were like, oh my goodness, look, there's a heron over there. Let's go allow ourselves the great honor of being eaten by him. No, they were just kind of doing their own things. And then the story, as it unfolds, the sun rose. The fish are like, we're out of the shallow water. Let's go to the deeper, cool depths, and the opportunity just, you know, passed by. And I think that's kind of ought to have been a wake up call for the heron. Like, oh, wait a minute, the world doesn't revolve around me. But that's the one difference. So our Lord is like, no matter where you are, I'm going to seek you out, and I want you to be with me. I want you to be happy. All you need to do is cooperate. And that's the that at time is like, as Saint Augustine actually used to say that towards the end. He's like, Lord, give what you ask and ask whatever you want. That kind of like, okay, I'm here, but you gotta, continue to help me. It's still kind of a struggle.
Sure, sure. But the Lord gives of himself, and you're right. He is seeking us. He's seeking out all of his sheep. He is the
Mm,
one thing that we can sort of want more of, that we can say, I want more. I want more Jesus. I want more Christ, right? So
yeah,
he's out there like waiting. He's out there looking. He's out there searching. And we're like, okay, we've got to go meet him. We've got to go
yeah,
find him. And by all means, ask for more Jesus, the one time, the one thing that we can do and desire more of, because what we'll find is it will create a different kind of hunger, not like whatever the heron was experiencing after only having a snail at the end of the day,
mm,
but it'll create a hunger for the best thing that we could ever have in our lives, and we'll want more Christ, we'll want more Jesus in our lives. So at the end of all of this, the things here, right, in this earthly plane, all the fish that we have access to, okay, don't expect to get the biggest and best thing out of all these earthly things. Like, take
mm,
what's given to you as a gift, accept it, be thankful, fill up. But when it comes to Christ, right, by all
mm,
means, go for it,
yeah,
dig in.
yeah, 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 exactly. And going back to the heron story, that's what makes me think that this isn't so much about being a picky eater. It's more about the vanity and the self-inflation of the heron. Because if the heron were truly modest, like you were saying, he wouldn't have minded eating the first fish that swam along, right? He wouldn't have been too hard to suit, right? Or satisfy, right? Um, but instead, he just kept letting those opportunities go by. I feel like if he were really desperately hungry, yeah, he would have jumped on the first meal or morsel that came by and would have been happy with it, right? But there's kind of like that, I don't know, maybe the heron wasn't in a state of desperation. The heron was kind of more of like a comfortable, routine existence. I don't know. Maybe I'm stretching it too much.
Well, I think it was a starting point, right? Because sometimes
Mm,
we sort of get comfortable in our lives, and then we sort of have that thought, that seed, like, I could use a little bit more today. I could use a little bit more tomorrow. But
hmm.
then it ends up sort of changing our taste buds, right? We sort of, well, I've decided after several weeks of getting more and more that those little things that I used to have aren't, that they are below me and they're beneath me, and that I am a master and I am a lord in my own right, and I deserve to have the best. But you sort of completely let go of the things that you used to live very happily on. So
Mm,
I think that the
hmm.
heron may have been in a position of sort of transitioning, potentially. That's why he wasn't desperate. He wasn't starving, or else you're right. He probably would have just gobbled up the first fish that he could have had, big, small, ugly, just give me some food.
Yeah.
Um, so if he were to continue on the path that he's on, he may find himself becoming more and more desperate,
Mm,
But if he learned his lesson, then the next day he probably was very content to take the first fish that he saw.
right. Yeah. A hungrier but wiser bird.
Yeah. And that's what we all need to sort of be, L- you know, hungrier for Christ and a bit
Yeah.
wiser in the way that we lead our lives. We all need to be kind of hungrier, wiser birds, every
Yeah.
day of our lives.
That's right. That's going to be my motto for the week. Be a hungrier but wiser bird.
And I believe that you, Michael Steele, will be the best hungry and wise bird that area of Pennsylvania has seen in a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thought process. Like, if you were a bird, what kind of bird would you think would you be? I couldn't imagine myself as a heron. I don't know. Maybe more like I don't know. Who knows? I
Maybe a
don't even know
parrot.
birds. Yeah. There you go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking to you about the heron, an Aesop fable, and covering the theme of wanting more and how sometimes wanting more can sort of be destructive on the other side. So we hope that you have enjoyed our discussion, Michael and I. Uh, and remember, if you haven't heard it, go visit us at our website, waobaudiotheater.org. Go to our YouTube channel for WAOB Audio Theater. Take a listen to The Heron or any of the other number of stories or poems or other recordings that we have. Lots of great content there. Michael, thanks so much for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you, Albert. It's always a joy to talk with you, and may we all be hungrier and wiser birds.
Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of The Table of Content. I hope you will tune in next time. Until then, be good, stay safe, peace.